thank you all for attending Blockchain Build Day again. Now we're going to be moving on to our second to last presentation of the afternoon, how to scale your blockchain and crypto podcast. So I'm going to be handing over controls to Brandon, and you should be able to share your screen now. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kirsten. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to be discussing how to grow a podcast in the blockchain space, how to scale it, and everything you really need to do to be successful with that. Before I jump into that, probably be helpful to talk a little bit more about my background so that you guys are a little bit more familiar with me. So I kind of got into blockchain when I was in college. I was in college from 2013 to 2017. And when I got into college as a freshman in 2013, I remember Bitcoin running up to like $1,200 or something like that, over 1,000. And I think that's what sparked interest for just about everybody. It was the first time it really hit the mainstream media as an event, as a bubble. And that carried a lot of interest for me when I was going through college. I wanted to understand what it was, like how that was going to shape into an industry. It was very, very early back then. I think Ethereum was like just releasing a Genesis block around the same time. And I remember going through college sometime my sophomore, junior year, and I was trying to invest in this stuff. I was trying to buy Bitcoin. I was trying to buy Litecoin. I remember sitting in my dining hall one time trying to buy some Litecoin, and I had some of my friends come by that thought I was trading stock. And I'd explained to them that I wasn't. I was trying to buy and sell this virtual currency that exists on the internet that you can't physically touch or see or anything. And they all probably thought I was crazy or high. The sentiment around crypto and blockchain was very, very small. It wasn't, not a lot of people understood it at the time, even in a college, university type of environment. So, but I did kind of carry on learning about that stuff. I lost a bunch of Litecoin too. And then my senior year, I decided to get into Ethereum. I thought it was really interesting that you could take what Bitcoin did successfully, and you could take the underlying technology, which was blockchain, and you could build on top of it. So I saw value in that early on. It was like $7, $8, something like that. So I bought a whole bunch of that my senior year in college. And in 2017, early 2017, that's when Ethereum went from like $7 to 50, and then 50 to 80, and then 80 to like 120, and then 120 to like 200. And that turned out to be a fun investment to make. And as a result of that, I actually started reconsidering what I wanted to do with my future, because I was actually in pre-med. I graduated with my degree in neuroscience, planning on going to medical school. And I had an interesting choice to make. Should I go to medical school, be stuck in that system, get my MD at some point by the time I'm 30, maybe start practicing, or branch off, travel, and explore the wonderful world of blockchain? So that's what I ended up doing. So after college, I kept exploring Ethereum, kept watching the markets kind of grow, watched Bitcoin grow, and eventually published a book or a manifesto of sorts on my thoughts on what I thought the market was going to do, and where I thought the market could go, and how it could develop into a full-blown industry that we now have. That was called the Satoshi Sequence. You can find it on Amazon. It's still there 3 years ago. So I published that in the fall of 2017, right before the market ran up for the first time, and we had our first like alt season, and Bitcoin went to like $20,000, and we had all this hype and hysteria in the media, people trying to understand what it was, where it was going. That was an interesting time for sure. I think many of you remember that. In 2018, I decided I wanted to learn more about the technical side of it. So I got into mining, and I actually launched my own mining operation and ran that for a couple years. mining Ethereum, Horizon or Zencash back at the time, some Litecoin, trying to better understand how the market is affected from the hash rate perspective, from different algorithms, and did pretty well with that for a while. That was a fun experience, getting to learn how that side of the industry works. And then in 2019, so about a year ago, I decided I wanted to get more involved in the industry. And I thought the best way to do that was to help educate people on what I've learned, things I know from my perspective, being a student fresh out of college, even from a medical background, all the things you can do with blockchain, how you can build on it. So I decided to launch a podcast, the BlockHash Podcast, or BlockHash Exploring the Blockchain, more specifically. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about how I kind of got started with it and all the things I learned, some of the mistakes I made, some of the things I did well, and how to kind of bootstrap that to get started if you guys actually want to launch a podcast in this industry. So some important things to note in terms of like statistics. So Nielsen back in 2017 for the US showed that 50% of all households actually listen to a podcast. And most people listen to a podcast at home, at work, in the car, at the gym, on a walk, pretty much everywhere they go. So podcasting is a big medium for people to consume information, to learn, to educate themselves. And audio is really the future of content consumption in a lot of ways. It's very efficient. It's very easy. You can consume it just about everywhere. Edison research showed that 62 million Americans tune in weekly to a podcast. Compared to 2013, there were only 19 million tuning into a podcast weekly. So that's tremendous growth from 2013 to now, and that growth is likely going to continue. So if you want a new platform other than your typical social media platform to talk about what you're doing, even if it isn't just about blockchain, podcasting is a great way to do that, especially if you can build a brand around it. So I've also helped launch a few different podcasts. Recently helped launch the Gen Unfiltered podcast, the Cold 6 and 60, the Oberst Investor podcast, and Podshots, where I'm actually a co-host. So I do have a little bit of experience in the industry, and in terms of like bringing up a podcast from scratch and kind of help directing getting it in the right direction, sort of say. So I'm going to show you how to do that effectively. So what do you need to know? So what are your podcasting goals, essentially? Like, what do you want to get out of a podcast, especially in blockchain? You need to ask yourself, why are you starting the podcast? I started my podcast because I wanted to educate people. I wanted to reach more students at universities. I wanted to reach small businesses, and I wanted to help bridge that divide and bring the technology to the average person. For you, that might be something completely different. For you, it might be fun. For another person, it might be very serious. So it all kind of depends on your main goal. Why are you starting the podcast? Like, what kind of subscribers and listeners do you want? How many do you want? You don't have to have thousands and thousands of listeners and subscribers and followers to have a successful podcast. You can have relatively smaller numbers and really high engagement. It's just as effective. So if you had 1,000 people subscribe to your podcast, and a high majority of those people actually were engaging with your content, were clicking on links, were following up with things you said or asking questions, and then that's, in a lot of eyes, a very successful podcast, where some maybe have hundreds of thousands of downloads or subscribers, but they have very low engagement. Which is also fine. There's different ways to go about the metrics, and a lot of the metrics in the industry are still growing, so it's even hard to get accurate numbers. So it's more important to focus on getting your listeners, your subscribers engaged with what you're talking about, rather than this just going for volume right away, especially if you're starting from scratch. Will you have guests on the show? So for my podcast for BlockHash, I have a guest on every single week. I think I've only missed a couple weeks in the last year. It's a very tough goal to have because you have to follow up with people and meet new people all the time. You have to be really good at scheduling. Some podcasts will do very well with this on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, or bi-weekly. It all kind of depends on what you're looking for and what you're looking to get out of it. But having guests on the show is very helpful. Having a conversation with someone is what people want to hear. Yeah, people love to hear you go on and rant about something or talk forever, but they're much more likely to, follow your show, more likely to subscribe if you keep it interesting, if you bring new voices on with new perspectives. How often will you publish an episode? Again, similar to guests, you want to decide the frequency. And more importantly, you want to be consistent. So if you decide you're going to put out a podcast episode every single week, you need to do it every single week, because your followers and subscribers and listeners, they're going to be expecting an episode on that day at that time every single week. So whatever you decide, be consistent with it. That's how you grow a following over time. Do you want to co-host? Sometimes some people are great just ranting and talking forever about, blockchain. Some people do have a lot of guests. Some people don't. If you have a hard time getting guests to come on, if you have a hard time, keeping a topic going on your own, sometimes bringing in a co-host to do it with you is helpful, because you can constantly, every single episode, have a back and forth conversation about something, and does make things a little easier. So that's all preference. And then, will you monetize? Ads are not cool unless the ads are cool. So do not run any ads for your podcast. Just focus on creating great content and sharing that with people. In time, the monetization part will all come together, whether it's, I'll talk about it a little bit later, but, people will eventually reach out to you, or you can start reaching out to other people to see if they want to help sponsor you. But monetization is really a small part of getting started. It's kind of like an end goal. Obviously, we all in the podcasting industry want sponsors. We all want to make some money off of sharing this valuable information that we put out consistently. But it shouldn't be the main thing you focus on, because remember, ads are not cool. Ads will deter people from wanting to follow you, especially if you run ads throughout your show, pre-roll, mid-roll, post-roll, talking about something all the time that they don't want to hear about. So if you run an ad, it needs to be something interesting to your audience. So when you start a podcast, you need to pick a good platform. It's very, very important for a lot of reasons. The best place to start is Anchor, because Anchor is free. Anchor was also recently acquired by Spotify, and Spotify is growing tremendously in the space, taking on Apple and Google and Amazon. In terms of the podcasting industry, I think Spotify recently, their price in the market jumped quite a bit because they signed a exclusive multi-year deal with the Joe Rogan podcast to be on Spotify starting, I think, this fall. So Spotify is growing tremendously, which means the tools for Anchor will grow tremendously. Its bandwidth will get better and better, and hopefully it'll stay free. So Anchor is a great platform to get started on. I've been using it. I still use it. I don't see the point in switching to something else yet. So definitely check that out first before you check out a different platform. I've also used Spreaker. Spreaker is really good. They're about $7 a month for about 100 hours worth of audio, which is more than enough to get started, especially if you don't plan on doing episodes that go for multiple hours on end. It all kind of depends on the length of your episode and what you're doing and what you're looking for. But generally, the main difference between a platform that's free and a platform that you pay for is the bandwidth. How much traffic can it handle? So if you're starting off, you're not going to have a high bandwidth need. You're not going to have a lot of people rushing in to listen to your podcast all at once. So you won't need to worry about a paid service. Go with Anchor. But as you grow, as you get better, you'll want probably a platform that offers you a little bit more flexibility in terms of that. So Spreaker is very good. Podbean is good. Buzzsprout, Blueberry, Libsyn, SoundCloud, they all offer great services if you put out audio for podcasts. They all range in price. Some of them restrict you to how many hours. Some are unlimited on the hours. Some of them go by the size of the audio file, such as Blueberry, but it all kind of depends on what you're looking for. But again, if you're starting out, go with something that's free like Anchor and just don't worry about the hassle. So there are some things that you definitely need when you're doing a podcast. You do want to have your podcast sound as good as possible, to look as good as possible. But the most important thing to focus on initially is the content and putting out the content consistently. But as you get in that routine, you definitely want to find the right equipment to optimize what you're doing. And you can do that relatively affordably without spending a lot of money. So microphone, you need a good microphone. It's the most important part. Good news is there are a lot of great microphones. They're cheap. That'll work just fine. Like I'm using a Blue Yeti Nano right now. It probably cost me like $60 or something like that. And it works fantastic. You could get the Blue Snowball. You could get the regular Blue Yeti. You could spend a little bit more money and you can get a Rode microphone. It all kind of depends if you want a condenser microphone, cardioid. You want something that captures audio from multiple angles, multi-directional, or just from one angle. It all kind of depends on, again, what you're doing, how you're doing your podcasts. If you're having a guest speaker in person, do you need two microphones or a multi-directional microphone? Are you doing it over Zoom, remotely? So you can save a lot of money on a microphone and get a really good one. So don't get sold into buying one that's just too expensive. Headphones are very helpful. Any pair of headphones will work. Standard Apple headphones, you get some Beats headphones, some Bose. They're not necessarily required either, but I mean, they do help because you want to be able to clearly hear what the other person is saying, especially if you have a guest. Zoom or Zencaster are very, very helpful if you're doing a podcast remotely. So if you're like myself and you live in Medellin, Colombia, and you're stuck in quarantine like everybody else, using a platform like Zoom is great because you can do a podcast, get good audio quality, and get video at the same time, put it up on YouTube. Very, very simple, and it's free for two people. If you do three people, you do have to pay for it because there's a 40-minute limit, but with two people, you can go for an unlimited amount of time. So Zoom is a fantastic option. Zencaster, if you're focused more on just getting the audio and you don't care too much about the video initially, Zencaster is better because it captures the raw audio locally. I'm not sure if Zoom actually does that. I've been trying to figure that out, but Zencaster does capture it locally, so you do get the audio in better quality. So if you're focused on just the audio, I'd say go with Zencaster. It's free, just like Zoom is. If you want the video, go with Zoom. In terms of software, like if you're doing post-production editing of an episode, if you have a Mac, GarageBand is just fine. I don't see the point in buying some sophisticated, expensive software when you really don't need to. So I've never looked for it. I just use GarageBand. It's super quick, super easy, and you have all the tools you need. So don't get suckered into buying something that you don't need. In terms of promoting your podcast, you want to create social media content, to promote it on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. Canva is a great option. It's very simple and easy to use with tons of templates. And it's free for most of the stuff on there. So you don't really need to spend any money. Again, it's another way to save money when you're starting a podcast. And then they do have, for like $10 a month, some more advanced features, such as like transparent backgrounds and stuff like that, and more premium photos that you can use and templates. They're relatively affordable for about $10 a month. So Canva is very, very helpful. Definitely check that out for putting out any kind of social media content. It makes it so much easier. So Another important thing for the podcast is you want a good intro. You don't necessarily need an outro, but you need a good intro. So I've had a great experience with musicradiocreative.com. They have professional voice actors that will do whatever you need for a script. They'll put in some FX sounds. They'll create a jingle for you, whatever you're looking for. You can be very creative and specific, and they will work with you. You can pick any kind of voice you want, from English to Russian to Latin. It doesn't really matter, and they'll do different languages. So it's a great way, and it's affordable too. I don't think the most I've ever spent was about $30 or something, pretty long, but it's affordable. It'll work for an intro in your podcast, and it's important because it hooks your audience, and it's something that's consistent. So like if you were structuring your podcast, you would, talk about something in the beginning. You'd have a general intro where you're talking about like what you're going to talk about in the podcast. Like you have a guest on, who the guest is going to be. Then after the main intro, you'd have the intro you got from Music Radio Creative that, is consistent for your podcast. It's kind of like think about it like your jingle, I guess. And then after that comes your content. Video blocks. So video blocks is great. I actually stumbled onto it more recently. You can sign up for a relatively good deal monthly or yearly. And you can get all kinds of video, audio, photo content that you need for promoting your podcast, especially if you put it up on YouTube. Maybe you want to do a more customized visual intro, or you want some more visuals within the podcast itself on YouTube, or want to mix it in with your Zoom. There's a lot of great content on there for a good deal. It makes it very, very simple to have everything in one place: video, audio, and photos, rather than just scrolling through Shutterstock and trying to find stuff. Veed. Veed is Veed.com. It's Veed.io. Veed is very helpful if you need to quickly create a video for your social media, or if you want to take snippets and create small snippets of your episode to promote on social media. Veed is fantastic. It's about $20 a month, and you get everything unlimited pretty much. I use it for just about everything other than just the podcast, but it's very helpful for content creation, and very fast too, and keeps the quality of video, which is important. Scheduling is important. Calendly makes it very easy, and it's free. If you have just one like little, I don't know what you call it, calendar set up for, scheduling guests. So you want to be very organized about when you have people coming on, when you have people recording. If you're doing it live, you want to sync everything up, right? If you're recording, doing a pre-recording and then publishing it later on, the scheduling part is very important, especially if you do have a lot of people that are interested. You want to make sure you have everything in your calendar, and you don't want to have to do it manually. And you can update it so you have your preferences from when you're available throughout a week, so they can just click on a time or a spot to do it with you, and it simplifies the whole scheduling process. That's basically it. It's something you have to have in podcasting if you really want to grow. You need to schedule things out. Have a dedicated email. You're going to get a lot of emails. You want to separate it from your personal email, so you know who's a guest, who's a sponsor, who you're talking to eventually be on the podcast, or if you're directing people to your podcast, or if you have an email list. You want it to all come from one central source. So having a dedicated email is very, very important. So those are the 10 things you definitely need when you get started. Places for syndication. So where do you want your episode to be heard? Obviously, you want it on Apple Podcasts. In my opinion, it's the most important one, because you get reviews, and reviews are important for getting in the new and noteworthy section of Apple Podcasts, because you'll get more exposure that way. So getting on Apple Podcasts first should be your first primary step for syndication, and focusing on those reviews to grow the exposure of the podcast, the credibility of the podcast. Second, you want to get onto Spotify immediately, because Spotify is growing tremendously and is really growing quickly in the podcasting space, more specifically. A lot of people are listening to podcasts through Spotify because they already listen to music through Spotify. And I wouldn't be surprised if Spotify overtook Apple and Google and Amazon in terms of audio at some point. So you need to be on Spotify next. You got to be on Google Podcasts. Google Podcasts will help you get indexed. It'll help you be in the Google search, which is important. When people go to Google and look up blockchain podcasts, you want your podcast to pop up in the top 50 or whatever that Google displays. You want it to pop up, your new episodes to pop up in that feed. Because people are looking actively for new content and information on the industry, on blockchain. So having your podcast on Google Podcasts and available in the Google search is very important for discovery. There's some other great platforms that are a little underrated that do very, very well, like Stitcher, which you can also get reviews for, which will push high on Google. Castbox. I did a episode with Renee Wong, who's the CEO of Castbox, and they have a platform called Livecast, so you can go live and do a podcast through the Castbox platform, and people can actually contribute to you with their own native digital currency, which you can convert to dollars and send to your bank. So there's a cool way there to eventually maybe monetize it a little bit, get people to contribute to the podcast for going live every once in a while, and people can engage and ask questions. So Castbox is a great platform. TuneIn's a good one. Overcast is very popular. If you're in the US, iHeartRadio is still a thing. You definitely want to be on there to maximize your exposure to people who listen to radio. YouTube, obviously, whether you have video or just audio, you still want to be on YouTube, because people go to YouTube to listen to podcasts and you will still pop up. So if you just do audio, create some cool background using like video blocks, for example, or just have a static background with your logo or something like that. Maybe animate it, just get creative with it. Make sure your audio is on YouTube no matter what. If you have video, it's even better. Podcrypt. So Jordan Last is a friend of mine who founded and created Podcrypt. It's a platform where you can online and on your phone listen to podcasts in the blockchain space. And I think not just in blockchain now, but essentially what Podcrypt does is it allows people to contribute automatically to you for producing episodes for your podcast. So if someone went to Podcrypt and they started listening to BlockHash and they started listening to something else and something else, Podcrypt would log how often they listen to each episode, and then you would have an Ether account, and you would deposit your Ethereum into the account, and it would auto distribute to contribute to those podcasts based on which ones you listen to most often. It'd do it by percentage. So it's a cool way to encourage people to contribute with crypto rather than just paying you in dollars or something like that. It's another alternative method for listening and for monetization if you want to get creative with it. But in my opinion, those are the 10 places for syndication you have to be. And there are others, but these are the most important and the most popular. So if you do want to have a guest on the podcast, you need to know how to find guests in the blockchain industry. The best way to go about getting a guest is to do outreach, because most people won't know about your brand new podcast from scratch right away. So you need to reach out to them. You want to email them, go into the submission forms for company websites, send them a nice, eloquent message on how you like what they're doing, what you enjoy about them. Ask if they'd be open to maybe having someone as a guest to talk about their product or their company or whatever they're doing in the blockchain space. That's what I did early on to get guests to come on, and you'd be surprised how often people will actually say yes. Being on a podcast is super easy. It doesn't require a whole lot. It's generally free for the other person. So it's mutually beneficial for them to get exposure and for you to build your resume of guests and build your credibility. So do the outreach all the time, every single day. Get into those submission forms. Twitter and Instagram. Get into the DMs, slide right into those DMs and start asking people that are in the space, that are building stuff on blockchain, that are just highly involved in crypto. Ask them if they'd be interested in talking or speaking, or if they know someone. Not everyone's going to respond, but you'll be surprised how often people do, especially in the crypto space. The community is pretty tight knit. So if you're legit and you build up your credibility, the more often people will respond to you in the DMs. And those relationships will, breed other connections and other relationships for other guests later on. If you need ideas of where to go, like what companies, what things are popular right now in the space, what are people talking about, go to CoinDesk or Cointelegraph or a similar news outlet for crypto and blockchain. Look for new individuals and companies that are, making headlines. I was able to get Pay with Moon, Lolly, Casanode on the podcast simply by going to CoinDesk, Cointelegraph.
Brandon, can you hear us? I think your audio cut out. Hello, hello? I'm going to try to touch base with Brandon and see if we can get him logged back on. Oh, there you are, Brandon. It looks like you got popped off.
That's okay.
Darn Colombian Wi-Fi.
I know that Colombian Wi-Fi, it's not reliable today. Yeah, that's what I was saying about referrals. So that's that. When you're doing a podcast, you want to ask good questions. You want to have stimulating conversations, make it interesting. People are going to listen and subscribe to you based on what you talk about. So for BlockHash, for example, it's formatted a lot like a conversation, or at least I try to make it formatted like a conversation, where I'll ask questions with the purpose of extending the conversation topic and making the podcast feel more natural. And you want to ask questions based on what the other person is talking about. So while it is important to do your research and have that list of ideas and topics to go over before you do the recording or go live, you also want to be taking active notes while you're listening, or at least be a very good listener and follow up with questions based on what they're saying. Extend the conversation. Yeah, you want to have someone tell their story. People love hearing stories, but you also want to dig into the details. And then some podcasts are much more like interviews, where you just have scripted questions and the person just answers those questions, the interviewee. Tell me about this. What is that? Tell me more about this or that, or blah, blah, blah. It all kind of depends on what you want for your podcast, and there's no right or wrong way to go about doing it. There are some great podcasts that are just straight up like interviews that do very, very well. And then there are podcasts that are just straight on conversations. You have no idea where it's going to go. And those are also exciting. There's no right or wrong way to do it. You just got to pick what you like the most. It's more fun to do conversations though. In terms of monetization, again, ads are not cool unless they are cool. So don't run an ad unless you think your audience will enjoy what you're presenting to them. The reason why I have not had an ad on is because my audience likes the free flow information, not having to pay for anything, not being inundated with crappy ads for things that are unrelated to blockchain. So if I have an ad on my podcast, if I do a pre-roll, mid-roll, post-roll type of ad, for 15, 30 seconds or something like that. It's going to be on something that appeals to them, something I think they will enjoy and want to hear about consistently. So I'm not going to talk about Charmin Ultra on my podcast, but I'd love to talk about Trezor, or talk about Lolly or Pay with Moon, for example, or products within the blockchain industry, services within blockchain that they are there for. They're listening to the podcast to learn about the industry. So if you're going to present them with an ad, it should be something that educates them that they're interested in, they actually want to use. You could also get into paid Q&As or paid interviews. They could go for, any company somewhere in the podcast or before the podcast. Another way to monetize, you could do monthly contributions. Anchor actually makes that really easy, where people can avoid, or you can avoid ads, and people can instead just contribute monthly to the podcast if they really like it. Some people do very well with that. Some people know how to get people to do that. There are some platforms that work strictly on a contribution basis to unlock content. So that is another method if you want to avoid the whole sponsorship and ad ordeal. But again, don't focus on monetization until you build up your audience, or at least hit your goal of having an audience at volume or an audience that's highly engaging. Focus on that first. And the monetization part will come later. Guarantee you that. So to kind of conclude everything I went through, the biggest key takeaway is you have to reach out to new people and forge new connections. It's very, very important for a podcast, especially a brand new one. You'll be surprised by who these people know when you build these connections and who they can refer you to and introduce you to. It's also very, very important to get ratings on your podcast. Get as many 5-star ratings as possible, as many reviews as possible. It pushes your podcast on Google. It pushes your podcast on Apple Podcasts, and get it into the new and noteworthy category, which you'll get seen even more. That stuff is very, very important, especially when you're brand new. So if you want an idea of what a podcast should sound like, the structure of a podcast, you can check out the BlockHash Podcast. I do it every single week. I try to have a guest on every single week. During quarantine, it's a little more difficult, but I have every single week, every single Wednesday, had a guest on, and that has benefited greatly. The consistency is important. And I have some amazing conversations with really, truly awesome people in the blockchain industry. So definitely go back to older episodes and check it out. There's some great CEOs and founders, developers, professors, universities, some elected officials, fantastic conversation. Just go back and listen to them. And you can feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, thoughts, or ideas, because I love meeting new people. Just go use my email and send me an email with any kind of question or feedback or ideas you have. I'm happy to engage with you at blockhash.team@gmail.com. On Instagram or on Twitter, just go to Zemp Brands or the BlockHash on Instagram. You can DM me there too. I'm fairly active in posting stuff. And if anyone has any questions that's in right now that wants them answered about podcasting in general or podcasting in the blockchain space, I'm happy to answer those. That wraps up my presentation.
Awesome, Brandon. Thank you for going so in depth with everything. I know a lot of the tools that you had mentioned earlier on in the presentation, I'm going to be using for some other content creation. So that was super duper valuable. Thank you once again for sharing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, they're very, very helpful. Not just for podcasting, but just content creation in general. When you're trying to be consistent with putting out content, sometimes you need something more streamlined that kind of takes out some of the work for you and makes it faster. So you spend less time dabbling with it. So again, Storyblocks, Veed, Canva, they're great platforms that'll save you a lot of money too and can quickly get stuff out for you.